There is a particular kind of man who believes that distance is the same as safety. That if enough years pass, enough borders are crossed, enough names are changed, the past loses its ability to reach him. Adolf Eichmann believed this. For 15 years, he was right. Then he wasn't. Eichmann did not vanish dramatically. There was no midnight escape across a frozen border, no Hollywood chase through burning rubble. He simply walked out of an American internment camp in 1946 using a false name, made his way through a network of sympathetic clergy and rattling couriers across Italy, boarded a ship under a Red Cross passport issued to a man called Ricardo Clement, and arrived in Buenos Aires in 1950 with a modest suitcase and no particular urgency. He found work. He found a neighborhood. He brought over his wife and children. He became, by every external measure, unremarkable. That was the plan. Unremarkability as a survival strategy. For a man who had spent the war years as the chief logistical architect of the murder of 6 million people, unremarkable was a form of genius. The State of Israel did not yet exist when Eichmann disappeared. The organization that would eventually find him, the Mossad, formally established in 1949, was barely a year old when he arrived in Argentina. Its resources were thin, its priorities were existential. Israel was fighting for its survival against neighboring armies. The bureaucrat who had sat behind a desk in Berlin and coordinated deportation schedules, transportation rosters, and camp capacities across a continent was not the most pressing threat on any active list. But he was not forgotten. He was never forgotten. The question was not whether Eichmann would be found. The question was when, and who would find him first. The first serious intelligence thread came not from any government agency but from a private citizen in Vienna. A partially blind Jewish notary named Lothar Hermann had fled Germany in 1938 and eventually settled in Argentina with his daughter Sylvia. In 1956, Sylvia began dating a young man named Klaus Eichmann. Klaus, who had grown up in Argentina, was not particularly careful about what he said. He spoke with pride about his father. He mentioned that his father had been a high-ranking officer during the war. He used the name Eichmann. Sylvia told her father. Her father, who had been in Dachau, understood immediately what the name meant. He wrote a letter to Fritz Bauer, the German Jewish prosecutor in Frankfurt who had been quietly building war crimes cases against Nazi fugitives. Bauer took it seriously. He passed the thread to Israeli intelligence. And Israeli intelligence, stretched thin and initially skeptical, filed it. Tracked it. And then, for a period that would later be described as one of the more frustrating bureaucratic episodes in the history of covert operations, largely let it sit. What changed the calculation was not new intelligence. It was the arrival of a man named Isser Harel. Harel was the head of the Mossad, and he had a quality that intelligence directors sometimes have and sometimes catastrophically lack. He understood when something was operationally important independently of whether it was politically convenient. The capture of Adolf Eichmann was not politically convenient in 1960. Argentina was a sovereign nation. Israel had no legal authority to operate on Argentine soil. The diplomatic consequences of a covert abduction on foreign territory were, by any reasonable measure, significant. Harel knew all of this. He also knew that the survivors of the camps were still alive. That the architects of what had been done to them were, many of them, living ordinary lives on ordinary streets in ordinary neighborhoods. And that if Israel did not act, the thread that Lothar Hermann's letter had started would dissolve back into the silence that had protected Eichmann for a decade. He ordered the operation. The team that was assembled was small by any standard. 8 Mossad officers, operating undercover identities, arriving in Buenos Aires over a period of weeks through different routes, checking into different hotels, carrying no material that could connect them to each other or to Israel. The operational philosophy was exactly what the Iranian script you studied describes: not speed, but patience. Not a single dramatic action, but a slow accumulation of confirmation. Before anything could happen to Eichmann, the team had to be certain they had the right man. The wrong man, an Argentine citizen, seized on Argentine soil, killed or kidnapped by foreign agents, would have been a catastrophe of the first order, not merely diplomatically but morally. Israel was not in the business of murdering innocent people. The precision requirement was absolute. The man sent to lead the surveillance was V.A. Haroni, a Mossad case officer who had grown up in Germany and spoke the language, the culture, and the silence of the world Eichmann had come from. Haroni tracked the address that Lothar Hermann's daughter had identified, Garibaldi Street, in the working-class suburb of San Fernando. He established a static observation point. He watched the house. He watched the routine. He watched a thin, balding, middle-aged man step off a bus each evening, walk the same path home, tend the same small garden, live the same small life. He took photographs. He cross-referenced. He sent the photographs back to analysts who compared them against the last known images of Eichmann from the war years. The face had aged. The posture was the same. The confirmation was made. Ricardo Clement was Adolf Eichmann. Now the operation entered its second phase, which was not capture. It was preparation. The team needed vehicles, safe houses, documentation, an exit route. They needed to know Eichmann's schedule with enough precision to identify a moment of vulnerability, a window where he was alone, where the street was clear, where the duration between the moment of contact and the moment of containment was short enough to prevent any response. They also needed one thing that is sometimes overlooked in the accounts of this operation. They needed Eichmann to be alive at the end of it. This was not a killing operation. This was an extraction. Israel intended to try Adolf Eichmann in an Israeli court, in front of the world, with full legal process. The operation required that the most infamous living war criminal be brought to Jerusalem to face judgment. Killing him in a Buenos Aires street would have been easier. It was not what Harel ordered. The date was set for May 11, 1960. Eichmann's routine had been observed long enough that the team knew he returned from work on the same bus, at approximately the same time, and walked the same route home. The operation was built around that narrow window, the walk from the bus stop to the house, a distance of perhaps 200 meters, on a street that was quiet in the early evening. The team positioned 2 vehicles. The surveillance unit confirmed the bus arrival. Eichmann stepped off. He walked. And in the middle of that walk, 2 Mossad officers approached him, disabled him with speed that left no time for resistance, and had him inside a vehicle before anyone on the street processed what had happened. He was taken to a safe house. He was held for 9 days. He was calm. He cooperated. When asked to confirm his identity, he gave his SS number from memory without prompting. The exit from Argentina was the most technically demanding phase of the operation and the one that has received the least attention. Israel had sent a diplomatic delegation to Buenos Aires to celebrate Argentina's 150th anniversary of independence. The El Al aircraft that carried the delegation back to Israel was, on its return journey, also carrying 1 additional passenger, sedated, dressed in airline crew uniform, walked onto the plane by Mossad officers who had prepared documentation presenting him as an Israeli crew member who had been injured and required medical transport. Argentine customs did not conduct a medical examination. The plane departed. Adolf Eichmann landed in Israel on May 22, 1960, 11 days after his capture on a street in San Fernando. The announcement came from David Ben-Gurion himself, standing before the Israeli Knesset. I have to inform the Knesset that a short time ago one of the greatest of Nazi war criminals, Adolf Eichmann, who was responsible together with the Nazi leaders for what they called the final solution of the Jewish question, was found by the Israeli security services. The word that is usually translated as found in English carries, in the original Hebrew, a weight closer to captured. Ben-Gurion used it deliberately. The world understood immediately. Argentina protested. The United Nations Security Council passed a resolution. Israel apologized for the violation of Argentine sovereignty. It did not apologize for the capture. The trial of Adolf Eichmann opened in Jerusalem in April 1961. It was the first trial in history to be televised internationally. Survivors testified for weeks. Eichmann sat in a bulletproof glass booth and described, with bureaucratic precision, the administrative structures he had managed. He used the same language he had used at his desk in Berlin: logistics, transport, processing, resettlement, the euphemistic vocabulary of industrialized murder. Hannah Arendt, reporting for The New Yorker, watched him and wrote the phrase that would outlast the trial itself: the banality of evil. The observation was controversial then and remains debated now. But the image it described was real. The man who had organized the deportation of millions was not a monster in the theatrical sense. He was an administrator. He had been, for 15 years in Buenos Aires, a factory foreman. He was found guilty on 15 counts. He was sentenced to death. He was hanged on June 1, 1962. His body was cremated and his ashes were scattered beyond Israeli territorial waters, a deliberate decision, so that no part of Adolf Eichmann would rest in any land. The Eichmann operation established something beyond the obvious lesson about the long reach of Israeli intelligence. It established a principle about the relationship between justice and time. The argument that Eichmann's captors made, not in press releases but in the act of the operation itself, was that 15 years was not enough. That geography was not enough. That a new name, a modest house, a bus route in a Buenos Aires suburb, none of it was a sufficient answer for what had been done.